Welcome to this video, which aims to help you to organise your revision on the theme of the importance of family in A Christmas Carol. You will need to have a pen, some paper and your brain, and a little bit of time as well to actually carry out some activities and get yourself organised. Before we get properly going, I just want to remind you of the assessment objectives for literature. There's a separate video that talks about these in quite a lot of detail, so I'm not going to do that, but you need to have all three assessment objectives clearly in your mind when you're thinking about this theme, because that will help you to put together really good responses to whatever theme actually. So very quickly, assessment objective 1 are the big ideas. How well are you answering the question? Have you shaped what you're saying about the text to make sure you are answering particularly what the question is asking about? Have you picked evidence that supports those points too? Assessment objective 2 is all about looking at that evidence and showing your understanding of the methods employed by the writers. Now, those two assessment objectives are the two most important ones. They're worth a maximum of 12 marks each, so you get 24 of your 30 marks from those two assessment objectives. The third assessment objective has a maximum of 6 marks, but that's still quite a large number of marks and can make the difference in a grade, and it's all about context, linking what you're saying about the play, or in this case the novella, to the time in which it was written. And it can look at language, culture, beliefs, anything at all relevant to the time in which it was written. So keep those in mind all the time, because you need to bring in ideas that touch on all three of those assessment objectives. So as you can see on the screen there, this is the approach we're going to take. I want you to think about the importance of family in A Christmas Carol, but review the events of all the stages. So give yourself a good 10 minutes to get your ideas organised. We are going to go through these stave by stave. So we'll start with stave 1 and go in order right to the end, to stave 5, to the end of it. We will then review what those big ideas are. So pause this video and give yourself a good 10 minutes to see if you can make notes under these headings. What can you remember? If you can't remember anything, get an online copy of the text, or if you're lucky enough to have a physical copy to hand, skim through, see what will jog your memory from actually looking at the text. So 10 minutes you've got, give it a good go. So hopefully by now you've given yourself the time to have a good go at this, and you're not just letting the video run on and copying the ideas from the screen, which I think is a little bit of a waste of time. Stave 1, I think initially might seem that there's not many ideas there to do with the theme of family, but I think there are a couple of important things. The first thing I mentioned there is Scrooge's isolation. Now, you might think, what's that got to do with family? Well, he chooses to isolate himself from his family. One of the quotations that probably springs to mind from stave 1 is Scrooge being described as solitary as an oyster, which makes it sound like he has no family, but we find out pretty soon in stave 1 that he does. So the second point I mentioned there is Fred. Now, Fred is Scrooge's sister Fan's son. And he's an important character because he represents the Christian spirit and is very positive about Christmas, and in fact every year arrives and offers Scrooge an invitation to spend Christmas with him, which Scrooge up until this point has always rejected. So family is important there because he never gives up on Scrooge. The other thing I think that is important about Fred is his speech that the clerk claps to. He talks about Christmas being a time when all mankind is treated as equal. He doesn't actually use the word family, but I think it's really important when you look at A Christmas Carol, you don't think about the most obvious meaning of family. There is a Christian family, and Dickens very much felt that people should regard their fellow man as worthy of treating with respect and caring about. Right at the very end of stave 1, we have the clerk rushing back to be with his family, and he has a clear joy about doing that. So that's really important as well, because in stave 1 the clerk's name isn't given. We later find out it's Bob Cratchit, but this is a man who's really quite different from Scrooge, and he's the opposite. In fact, he's somebody for whom family is everything. So that's a really important point. So stave 2 covers family in a much more direct way, I think, than stave 1, because the Ghost of Christmas Past is all about showing Scrooge things he's forgotten about, and a lot of them touch on the theme of family. So the first thing is quite painful. It's his own isolation from his family as a young boy. We see 2 moments in his time at boarding school, one where he's completely alone and one where he's saved by family because his younger sister Fan turns up and saves him. It's interesting to speculate as well about the importance of family, because at some point Scrooge has again broken away from his family and isolated himself, and it might be something to do with Fan's death, which is mentioned by the Ghost of Christmas Past, and it's something that obviously is painful for Scrooge, but it's never really explicitly explained. Fezziwig, who's Scrooge's old boss, that he also pops up in terms of somebody who thinks of his community as a family. Now, we are told about his wife and daughters, and they're presented in a very positive way as well. And like I said, for stave 1, don't just think of family as a limited thing, as to do with literal family in the way we think about it as our siblings and mother and father, because Fezziwig seems to treat his 2 apprentices as family, and Christmas is a time where everybody is brought together as a family, and it's because of the Christian spirit that happens. Fezziwig, don't forget, is the man who has light emanating from his calves because he's such a good man, and it is a reminder to Scrooge about the importance of treating people like family. I think the final point I would highlight from stave 2 is a very painful memory for Scrooge, and this is where he's reminded of what he's given up. He was in love with a girl called Belle, who eventually broke off the engagement with him because Scrooge was so obsessed with pursuing wealth and money. And we see the scene where the engagement is broken, and Scrooge doesn't seem too upset by that, but he's very, very upset when he sees Belle years later surrounded by her children with her husband happily married, because it's a reminder to him of what family brings and what he has missed out on in the choices that he's made. So family is absolutely central there.
It's no surprise that stave 3 is the stave where family is represented absolutely at the heart of everything, because it is literally the Ghost of Christmas Presents stave. So it's about showing people enjoying the current Christmas. He is a giant because for that reason, because Christmas is absolutely central. So the stave actually opens with an image of people preparing for Christmas and the excitement of Christmas on the streets. But I've in particular focused in on people leaving church on Christmas morning, because that's absolutely central to what Christmas is. It is a celebration of the birth of Christ. And for Dickens and people at the time, that should be at the heart of whatever Christmas represents. That's changed a lot in the modern world, but certainly in Dickens' times, that is at the heart of Christmas, actually celebrating the birth of Christ. The best example of that are the Cratchits, because these are people who they're almost too perfect, because they barely complain about anything. In fact, they don't complain. They're not ungrateful at all, despite the fact they have very little. We see them absolutely embracing the little that they have and loving Christmas time. The only little blip in their day is when Bob raises a toast to the founder of the feast, who is Scrooge himself, and his wife isn't very happy about it. And that is the only time there's any discord in the Cratchits family Christmas. They are the perfect example of a Christian family. Similarly, we have Fred, who also defends Scrooge in the same way that Bob does when the others poke fun at him. He's there with his wife and her sisters, and other friends, and the topic of Scrooge comes up, and Fred talks about Scrooge's situation and how the only person that Scrooge is harming is himself, and that he will always give him the chance to come back. And that's the idea of Christian redemption. And Fred is one of those good Christians that are presented like Fezziwig and like Bob Cratchit to show us an example of how Christians should behave. And that is what Dickens was trying to project when he was writing the novella, because he felt there were people who were calling themselves Christians who really weren't and didn't care about people enough. The other aspect that I focused on here are the lots of people that Scrooge is shown by the ghost enjoying Christmas in quite isolated and extreme situations. They're physically isolated, but they still embrace Christmas. Scrooge isolates himself literally from family, but these are people who are in not very comfortable situations, but they still find time to celebrate the birth of Christ. So we've got a family in the mines who are gathered around a fire. There are men on a lighthouse celebrating Christmas, and then men out far at sea on board a ship, all celebrating Christmas, and they're all families in their own way. The final point I mentioned there is ignorance and want, because I think what Dickens is trying to show there is not every poor family is like the Cratchits, who have their Christianity to keep them together and to give them that strength, and what happens if there are people who are living in poverty and are ill-educated can sometimes be a little bit frightening. So it's, if you like, a warning to people about what happens if you don't look after the poor, and how it is important for everyone to be treated as part of a family in that kind of way. Stave 4 is important because it shows contrasts. It's of the bleakest of all the staves in the novella, because it is basically the final piece of the jigsaw in terms of what Scrooge needs to learn. And families are shown in a limited way. We see the lonely death of a man who doesn't have a family. We later find out that is Scrooge, and Scrooge is horrified by the idea of that if you're not with family, you don't have anyone to look after you. And in fact, it's something that the laundress who steals from Scrooge and sells his goods at Old Joe's actually says, if he had someone, we wouldn't be able to do this. So it shows how important family is. The other mention of family in that regard is the poor couple in debt, who were actually pleased at Scrooge's death because it gives them some respite. They do feel guilty about it, but there's a part of them can't help feeling glad that somehow they're going to be able to get through and not end up in the poorhouse. So again, it's a flip side of it, really. We see the pleasant side of Christmas in Stave 3, and then the dark side, if you like, in Stave 4. It ends with the Cratchits and Tiny Tim at his death, a really, really touching scene, and again emphasises the importance of the Christian family, because they have the strength to carry on despite their loss, and it is a huge loss for them, and it's an incredibly touching scene, but that strength is given them by their Christian faith. So in Stave 5, the end of it, the theme of family is explored in the way everything is resolved. We've got Scrooge reconnecting with his family. He goes to Fred's and enjoys the Christmas day with Fred, his wife, and their friends, and his wife's sisters, and has a fantastic time. And it's quite heartwarming the way he does that. The other thing is his response to the Cratchits and also to the wider community. So first of all, for the Cratchits, we know that he helps Bob. He raises his salary, but makes a commitment to help the struggling family, and he uses that phrase, struggling family. The impact of that is huge because Tiny Tim survives, and we learn that Scrooge becomes a second father to Tiny Tim. It isn't on the slide there, but linked to that, Scrooge also makes a commitment to help the wider community, and as we said, that can be seen as family too. And he gives a back payment to the charity worker who visited his office in Stave 1, who he happens to meet in the street, which makes up for all the years he hasn't given payments. So again, at the end of it, family is absolutely central. So, what big ideas did you come up with? What I've tried to do here is to keep it to three. The three key ideas that you could bring in regardless of which extract you are given. And I think if you review the content of each of the staves, these things keep recurring. So the idea of strong family unity coming from Christian faith is absolutely central with the Cratchits, but it's not just the Cratchits. There are other examples of Christian faith bringing people together. And ultimately, when Scrooge returns to the family fold and joins Fred at Christmas, it's in full Christian belief that that's the right thing to do. The other message, a more general message, but linked to the first one, is love being at the heart of family. And that comes across really strongly in Stave 5, but it runs through lots of examples of people being caring towards other people. And it does link, obviously, to their Christian faith, but there is a joy in the way the people who embrace their Christianity, in the way they live their lives. And also linked to that, because it's very difficult to separate these things off, but I think it's really important to make it a distinct point, is Dickens' belief in family being across society, and we have a responsibility to look after people who are vulnerable. And now, obviously, that especially links with the poverty at the time caused by the Industrial Revolution. So if you think about any of the extracts that you might get that touch on the theme of family, almost certainly all three of those points will be relevant to the extract that you're looking at. So whatever the question, focus on those three things and link your ideas to those three things, and make sure that you are shaping your response to link to those big ideas, not simply just repeating the events that happen without thinking about the question. So the final slides there, just to remind you, there's a later video where we look at an example question. So I will be asking you to look at these 3 points and consider how well they actually fit in to answering the example question. So that's something for you to look forward to if you continue watching.